Yamamoto Kenji pulls a steel tape measure across a hole that should not exist. The year is 1946. The wreck sits in 17 fathoms off Huon Gulf, Papua New Guinea. What remains of the transport Teo Maru lists against a coral shelf, her starboard hull exposed at low tide. Yamamoto works for the Japanese government's post-war salvage authority, cataloging losses for insurance claims that will never be paid. His job is simple: measure the damage, describe the cause, move to the next wreck. This one stops him. The breach runs 11 feet across at the waterline, not above it, not below it, at it. The steel pedals outward in a pattern Yamamoto has never seen, metal pushed into the ship rather than down through the deck. A conventional bomb falls. It punches through superstructure, through cargo holds, through engine rooms. It leaves vertical wounds. This wound is horizontal. He sketches the damage in his field notebook, writes a question he cannot answer. Bomb trajectory appears parallel to sea surface, method unknown. 3 years earlier, Captain Sato Hiroshi stood on the bridge of a transport in this same convoy and watched aircraft do something aircraft were not supposed to do. They came from the horizon, not from above, from the horizon, like ships, like torpedoes with wings. His anti-aircraft crews had trained for one geometry: guns elevated, tracking bombers at 12,000 feet, 15,000 feet. The geometry that arrived was 90 degrees wrong. The American planes crossed the water at the height of a tall man. Their bombs did not fall. They skipped, like stones thrown by children across a pond. One skip, two skips, then impact at the waterline, the one place a transport cannot survive a breach. Sato watched 3 ships in his convoy take hits in under 4 minutes. All 3 sank. The attack came from directions his gunners could not traverse fast enough to track. Came from altitudes their weapons could not depress far enough to reach. We had prepared for everything except what happened, Sato would write after the war. The bombers flew below our guns. This is the problem the Japanese Navy never solved. American medium bombers, B-25s, A-20s, learned to attack cargo ships from 50 feet, releasing bombs that bounced across the surface and struck hulls where armor was thinnest and flooding was fastest. The technique turned every convoy into a shooting gallery, an anti-aircraft doctrine into a useless manual. Cargo holds full of troops and supplies became mass graves along the sea lanes between Rabaul and New Guinea. I'm still digging through convoy reports and attack summaries for the full story. Hit subscribe if you want to see how this played out across the Pacific. And if you've read something about skip bombing that I should know, drop it in the comments. The good stuff comes from people who notice details. The Japanese called these attacks by a word that translates roughly as horizontal bombing, but the term fails to capture what made them lethal. Horizontal implies level, implies measured. What arrived over Japanese convoys was closer to chaos. Bombers weaving between masts at 250 miles per hour, releasing ordnance so close that their own propeller wash disturbed the water behind them. Yamamoto finishes his measurements on Teo Maru. He has documented 17 wrecks in this theater. 14 show the same damage pattern: waterline breaches, horizontal entry angles, steel pushed inward. He does not know the name of the technique. He has no way of knowing that American crews practiced it on hulks in Australian harbors, or that a single engagement in early March 1943 proved the concept so completely that Japanese convoy operations in the Southwest Pacific never recovered. What he knows is simpler. Something happened here that existing categories cannot explain. Ships died from a direction that bombs are not supposed to come from. The salvage report goes to Tokyo, filed with hundreds of others. The question Yamamoto wrote in his notebook, "Method unknown," remains unanswered in the official record. But the men who survived the convoys knew the method. They had watched it happen from bridge wings and gun tubs, watched aircraft materialize from sea spray and palm tree height, watched bombs skip once, twice, then vanish into hulls at the waterline. They knew. They just had no answer for it. The manila folder on General George Kenney's desk contains 23 mission reports from January 1943. The paper smells like mildew. Everything in Brisbane smells like mildew. The humidity works into documents within days of filing. Kenney has read each report twice. The numbers do not improve on second reading. His B-17s and B-24s flew 271 sorties against Japanese shipping that month. They dropped 482 bombs from altitudes between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. They hit 6 ships. 6. The mathematical reality is worse than it sounds. A bomb released from 10,000 feet takes roughly 22 seconds to reach sea level. A transport making 12 knots covers 440 feet in that time. The bombardier must predict where the ship will be nearly half a minute after release. He must account for wind at every altitude between aircraft and target. He must hold steady through anti-aircraft fire while the pilot flies straight and level for the bomb run. Miss by 50 feet, and the bomb does nothing but raise a column of water. Kenney's crews were missing by hundreds of feet, sometimes thousands. The statistical hit rate worked out to 1.2%. For every 100 bombs his men dropped, 99 struck empty ocean. The crews knew the numbers too. They could feel them. Briefing rooms in Port Moresby went quiet when the mission boards showed shipping strikes. The men understood what it meant. Fly 6 hours through equatorial heat, cross 800 miles of open water, face anti-aircraft batteries and fighter patrols, drop ordnance that would almost certainly miss, then fly 6 hours home. Repeat until your luck ran out. And the convoys kept getting through. Rabaul sat 650 miles from the Japanese bases on New Guinea. Transports loaded with troops, ammunition, and rice steamed down the slot between New Britain and New Guinea on regular schedules. Kenney's bombers attacked them. The convoys delivered their cargo anyway. The Japanese garrison at Lae grew. The garrison at Salamaua grew. American and Australian ground forces watched supplies flow into enemy positions they were supposed to be strangling. High-altitude bombing against moving ships was a solved problem in theory. The Norden bombsight could place a bomb within a 50-foot circle from 20,000 feet, in perfect conditions, against stationary targets, with no evasive action. The Pacific offered none of those things. Targets moved, weather shifted. Ships turned the moment they spotted bomb bay doors opening. The technical term was circular error probable. The human term was waste. Kenney had commanded bomber units in Europe. He understood what his aircraft were designed to do: hit factories, rail yards, supply depots, fixed infrastructure, objects that stayed where they were. His pilots had trained for that mission. The Pacific gave them something else entirely: small gray shapes on vast blue backgrounds, moving at unpredictable headings, defended by crews who had learned to watch for aircraft at altitude and turn hard the moment bombs fell. Some officers in Brisbane suggested the obvious solutions: more aircraft, more bombs, better training. Saturate the target area with enough ordnance that statistical probability would eventually deliver hits. Kenny did the arithmetic. He would need 10 times the bomber force to achieve reliable convoy interdiction through volume alone. He did not have 10 times the bomber force. He did not have twice the bomber force. What he had was a few squadrons of medium bombers, a logistics chain stretched across 7,000 miles of ocean, and a war that would not wait for reinforcements. The problem sat on his desk in 23 folders. His air crews were dying for a 1% hit rate. Someone in 5th Air Force, the records disagree on exactly who brought it up first, mentioned that the Royal Air Force had experimented with low-altitude attacks against ships in the North Sea. Bombs released at mast height, no time for evasive maneuvers, direct hits or very near misses. The idea sounded insane. It also sounded like the only option left. Kenny started asking questions. He wanted to know if a medium bomber could survive an approach at 50 feet. He wanted to know what happened to a bomb dropped that low and that fast. He wanted to know if anyone had tried it against a defended target. The man with answers worked out of a sheet metal hangar at the Townsville depot, and nobody in Brisbane wanted to hear from him. Paul Irvin Gunn was 50 years old, former Navy enlisted, 21 years in uniform before he retired and took a job flying for Philippine Airlines. The war caught him in Manila. He evacuated his family on one of the last transports out, flew reconnaissance missions for MacArthur during the retreat, and ended up in Australia running aircraft maintenance for 5th Air Force. His rank was captain. His authority extended to keeping planes flyable. Nobody asked maintenance officers for tactical opinions. But Gunn had opinions, loud ones, delivered in a vocabulary that documented his decades as an enlisted man. He had watched the same mission reports cross his desk that crossed Kenny's. Broken aircraft coming back from shipping strikes, flak damage, bullet holes, engines failing from tropical corrosion, and the cargo manifests from wrecked B-25s, empty bomb bays, full ammunition cans. His bombers were dying without dropping anything that hit. The geometry was wrong. Gunn told anyone who would listen. High-altitude approaches gave Japanese gunners minutes to track incoming aircraft. The Norden bombsight was designed for strategic targets, not for a Maru doing 14 knots and zigzagging. The whole doctrine assumed conditions that did not exist over the Bismarck Sea. What 5th Air Force needed was not better bombardiers. It needed a different weapon. Gunn had sketched his idea on butcher paper in December 1942. The B-25 carried a glazed nose section, plexiglass panels, bombardier station, a single .30 caliber gun for defense, useless weight for the mission Gunn envisioned. Cut it off. Replace it with solid aluminum. Fill the space with .50 caliber machine guns, 4 of them, fixed forward, aimed wherever the pilot aimed the airplane. Add 2 more guns in blisters on either side of the fuselage. The aircraft becomes a gunship. It comes in at 50 feet, strafing the deck to suppress anti-aircraft crews, then releases bombs so close that accuracy becomes irrelevant. Staff officers in Brisbane reviewed the proposal. Their objections filled several pages. The B-25 was a medium bomber. Its role was bombardment, not strafing. The airframe was not stressed for the recoil of 8 forward-firing guns. The weight distribution would shift dangerously. Training doctrine would have to be rewritten. Maintenance would become a nightmare. The most damning objection was simpler. Gunn was a depot officer, a wrench-turner, a man whose job was to fix aircraft rather than redesign them. His proposal went into a filing cabinet. Gunn kept talking. He cornered pilots in mess halls. He walked uninvited into operations briefings. He made himself sufficiently annoying that his commanding officer threatened disciplinary action if he did not stay in his lane. The response was characteristic. "My lane is keeping these boys alive," Gunn reportedly said. "What's yours?" The B-25s kept flying shipping strikes. The hit rate stayed below 2%. The convoys kept delivering troops to Leh and Salamaua. And in February 1943, General George Kenney flew to Townsville to inspect the maintenance depot. The visit was routine. Kenney asked Gunn directly what he thought was wrong with anti-shipping operations. The question opened a dam. Gunn talked for 40 minutes. He produced the sketches, walked Kenney through the modifications, nose removal, gun installation, ammunition feeds, armor plating around the pilot's seat. Then the attack profile. Come in at wave height. The approach negates the enemy's altitude tracking. Open fire at 1,000 yards to suppress return fire. Release bombs at 200 yards, close enough that they skip across the water rather than falling toward it. The bomber becomes a torpedo plane without the torpedo's limitations. Kenney asked how long the modification would take. 3 weeks, Gunn said. He already had a B-25 on blocks that he had started cutting apart without authorization. The staff officer's objections still applied. Doctrine and training would have to change. The airframe might not survive the stress. But Kenney had 23 folders of mission reports on his desk and a 1% hit rate. Finish the modification, he told Gunn. Operations would prepare a test program. The wrench-turner's fantasy was now official 5th Air Force policy. The aircraft designation would be B-25G1. Gunn's crews called it the Commerce Destroyer. 0630 hours, February 19, 1943. The transport Nojima Maru runs gunnery drills in the waters off Rabaul. Her anti-aircraft crews rotate through their stations in the pre-dawn darkness, loading clips, checking traverse mechanisms, calling target bearings to spotters on the bridge. The smell of gun oil mixes with salt spray. Somewhere below, 2,000 troops of the 51st Division wait in cargo holds for transport to Leh. The drill scenario follows standard Imperial Navy procedure. Incoming bombers at Angels 12, 12,000 feet. The gun crews elevate their mounts, track imaginary aircraft descending through bombing runs. The 25mm Type 96 guns traverse smoothly on their pedestals, designed for exactly this geometry. No one drills for aircraft at 50 feet. The oversight was not stupidity. It was doctrine, institutionally approved and catastrophically wrong. Japanese anti-aircraft theory developed from observation of American and British bombing practice in the 1930s. Level bombers attacked from altitude. Dive bombers came down at steep angles. Torpedo planes approached low, but followed predictable vectors toward the beam. Each threat profile had a corresponding defense. Mount the guns high. Train crews to track fast-moving objects against sky backgrounds. establish interlocking fields of fire that covered approach corridors from 8,000 feet down to wave height. The mathematics looked complete on paper. What the doctrine did not anticipate was an aircraft that refused to climb, a bomber that crossed the horizon at mast height and stayed there. The Type 96 gun mount could depress 15 degrees below horizontal. Against a target 50 feet above the water and closing at 250 miles per hour, 15 degrees was not enough. The gun physically could not aim low enough to track. Worse, the crews had never practiced for it. Training syllabi for convoy escort gunners emphasized lead calculation against diving aircraft. Spotters learned to call altitude and heading for targets silhouetted against clouds. The entire sensory vocabulary of anti-aircraft defense, the sound of engines at altitude, the glint of sunlight on wings thousands of feet up, the slow drift of a formation across the visual field, assumed attackers would announce themselves from above. An aircraft at wave height announced nothing. It emerged from sea clutter on radar, if radar existed on the escort. It appeared visually as a dot against the water, nearly impossible to distinguish from whitecaps until it was close enough to strafe. The human eye expects threats to come from above or from the horizon at eye level. It does not expect threats to come from below eye level, rising out of the ocean's surface glare. The geometry problem compounded across every ship in a convoy. A transport superstructure created blind spots at low angles. The bridge, the cargo booms, the funnel, the lifeboat davits, all blocked sightlines for gunners trying to track aircraft skimming the waves. Escorts positioned to defend against high-altitude attack found their fields of fire masked by the very ships they were protecting. A bomber coming in at 50 feet could use the convoy's own formation as cover, weaving between hulls until the final attack run. Imperial Navy officers understood pieces of this problem. After-action reports from early 1943 noted that American medium bombers were adopting lower attack profiles. Recommendations circulated for modified gun mounts with greater depression angles. Training updates suggested practicing against low-altitude targets. The recommendations went to committee. The committees met in Tokyo and Truk. The war continued. Time was the resource Japan did not have. Modifying gun mounts required shipyard capacity that was already committed to new construction. Retraining gunners meant pulling them from convoy duty. The institutional momentum of existing doctrine, the manuals printed, the instructors trained, the assumptions embedded in every escort captain's mental model, could not reverse course fast enough to matter. By the time anyone in Tokyo recognized that American bombers had found a doctrinal blind spot, the bombers were already through it. The crews on Nojima Maru finish their drill at 07:15. They secure the guns, log the exercise as complete, resume routine steaming toward the convoy assembly point. In 12 days, they will join the 8-ship convoy designated Operation 81. The transports will carry 6,900 troops and equipment through the Bismarck Sea toward Leh. Guns modified B-25s will be waiting. The American bombers have never stopped a convoy to Leh. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura said this to his staff officers on the morning of February 28, 1943, as Operation 81 completed loading at Rabaul. The statement was accurate. It was also the last time accuracy would matter for the men under his command. The harbor stank of bunker oil and rotting copra. 8 transports rode at anchor in Simpson Harbor: Oigawa Maru, Teiyo Maru, Kyokusei Maru, Nojima Maru, Ayo Maru, Kembu Maru, Taimei Maru, Sinai Maru. Their holds contained 6,900 troops of the 51st Division, plus artillery pieces, ammunition, vehicles, and enough rice to sustain operations for 3 months. 8 destroyers would escort them: Shirayuki, Arashio, Asashio, Tokitsukaze, Yukikaze, Uranami, Shikinami, Asagumo. 100 aircraft from 4th Air Army would provide cover from fields around Rabaul. The convoy represented the largest reinforcement attempt to New Guinea since Guadalcanal. Kimura had run convoys through American air attacks before. His confidence rested on mathematics he had seen proven repeatedly. High-altitude bombers missed. They dropped their payloads from Angels 10 or 12. The bombs fell for half a minute, and by the time the water erupted, the transports had moved somewhere else. The Americans could not hit moving ships. Everyone in the Imperial Navy knew this. The transports weighed anchor at midnight. The timing was deliberate. Night steaming through the first stretch would put the convoy beyond range of Australian reconnaissance aircraft by dawn. They would round the western tip of New Britain, enter the Bismarck Sea, and follow the coastline southeast toward the Vitiaz Strait. 3 days of sailing. American search planes might find them, probably would find them, but finding and stopping were different problems. The sea that night ran calm, swells no more than 3 feet, the water black under overcast skies. Troops crowded the decks of the transports, too many men for the berthing spaces below. The smell of sweat and fish and tobacco smoke and engine grease rose from packed bodies. Engines thrummed through steel hulls. Somewhere forward, officers studied charts and plotted course changes designed to complicate any bomber's calculations. The convoy made 12 knots in tight formation, destroyers screening the flanks, running lights extinguished. What Kimura did not know, could not have known, was that 5th Air Force had spent the previous 3 weeks preparing something he had never encountered. In hangars at Port Moresby and Townsville, ground crews had been welding gun mounts into B-25 nose sections. Pilots had been practicing skip bombing runs against hulks anchored in practice areas. The approach profiles called for attack altitudes of 200 feet, then 50 feet, then lower. Some pilots came home with salt spray on their windscreens. The Americans were not planning to bomb from altitude. They were planning to come in at wave height, guns blazing, and release ordnance close enough that the bombs would skip across the water like stones on a pond. The Type 96 guns on Kimura's escorts could not depress low enough to track them. The convoy's formation would create blind spots that attacking aircraft could exploit. Every assumption embedded in Japanese anti-aircraft doctrine, the assumptions that had protected convoys for 18 months, would become irrelevant the moment the first B-25 crossed the horizon at 50 feet. March 1st, 1943. A B-24 reconnaissance aircraft spots the convoy north of New Britain. The pilot radios coordinates. In operations rooms across New Guinea, staff officers begin plotting intercept courses. Weather reports show a front moving through the Bismarck Sea. Low clouds, rain squalls, ceiling under 1,000 feet. The convoy might slip through under cover of storms, or the weather might break. Kenny's bombers load ordnance and wait for targeting updates. The pilots know this is the test. All of it. Guns promises, the practice runs, the tests against stationary hulks. Now they would find out if it worked against a defended convoy, making 12 knots through open water. The transport steamed southeast, 6,900 men in the holds. Artillery pieces lashed to cargo decks. 3 months of supplies for a garrison that would never receive them. The countdown had begun. Kimura's confidence would last exactly 47 more hours. Lieutenant Ed Larner pushes the yoke forward and watches the altimeter needle drop through 100 feet, then 70, then 50. The Bismarck Sea fills his windscreen, gray water, gray sky, and somewhere ahead, the black shapes of Japanese transports. His B-25 shudders in the turbulence off the wavetops. Salt spray streaks the plexiglass. The aircraft designation painted on his nose section reads Jap Trap. Behind the solid aluminum where a bombardier's station used to be, 4 50-caliber machine guns point wherever he points the airplane. March 3rd, 1943, 10:08 a.m. The convoy appears as geometry first, masts, then superstructures, then hulls resolving out of the morning haze. 8 transports in ragged formation, destroyers circling the flanks. Larner counts the ships in the 2 seconds before everything becomes chaos. His flight of 4 B-25s spreads into attack formation, each pilot picking a target, each aircraft dropping lower until the props churn spray from the swells. On the deck of Teiyo Maru, a gunner swings his Type 96 toward the approaching aircraft and discovers the limit of Japanese doctrine. The mount will not depress far enough. The bomber is below his field of fire, not diving toward him, not climbing, just skimming the water at 250 miles per hour, growing larger with every heartbeat. He cranks the elevation wheel uselessly. The aircraft's nose begins winking orange. 50-caliber rounds walk across the transport's deck at 1,200 yards. The tracers look lazy at first, almost floating, then accelerate into something too fast to track. Steel splinters fly from the superstructure. A lifeboat disintegrates. The gunner feels impacts around him before he hears them. Metal shrieking, men screaming, the deck jumping under his feet. He is still trying to bring his gun to bear when a round takes him through the chest. Larner holds the trigger down. His aircraft vibrates with the recoil of 8 guns firing simultaneously. The transport's bridge windows shatter. Figures tumble. Smoke begins rising from somewhere amidships. At 500 yards, he can see individual faces on the deck, men running, others falling, a few frozen where they stood. At 300 yards, he releases the bomb. The 500-pound weapon drops from the bay, strikes the water, and skips. It bounces once, twice, 3 times across the surface like a flat stone thrown by a giant. The trajectory carries it directly into Teiyo Maru's hull at the waterline. The explosion punches a hole below the armor belt, in the thin plating where naval architects never expected a bomb to arrive. Larner hauls back on the yoke and clears the transport's mast by what feels like inches. Behind him, his tail gunner watches the ship begin to list. The attack lasted 11 minutes. 13 B-25s made runs on the convoy. They came in waves, each flight targeting different ships, the noise of their engines lost in the general thunder of guns and explosions. The Japanese escorts fired continuously and hit almost nothing. Their weapons could not track targets that refused to rise above 50 feet. Destroyers attempted to interpose themselves between bombers and transports, but the B-25s simply went around them, using the convoy's own formation as cover. They came so low, We could see the pilots' faces, one survivor later told interrogators. Our guns were useless. We could only watch. By 10:19, 3 transports were sinking. By noon, 2 more had been abandoned. The destroyers pulled alongside burning hulls to rescue survivors, and the bombers came back for second runs. Kyokusei Maru took a skip bomb in her engine room and went down in 4 minutes. Nojima Maru, the same ship whose gun crews had drilled against high-altitude attack 2 weeks earlier, burned to the waterline with 1,800 troops still aboard. The convoy scattered. There was nowhere to scatter to. Kimura ordered the surviving transports to beach themselves on the New Guinea coast rather than continue toward Leh. It was the only decision left. The destroyers rescued what men they could, dodging aircraft that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. P-38s arrived to strafe the rescue boats. B-17s bombed from altitude, while the modified B-25s made low runs. When darkness finally ended the attack, 8 transports and 4 destroyers had been sunk. 3,000 troops reached shore in scattered groups. The rest, nearly 4,000 men, died in the water or on burning decks. The 1% hit rate was over. 10:23 a.m., March 3, 1943. A chief petty officer on the destroyer Asashio stands behind a Type 96 mount and screams at his gunner to depress. The gunner cranks the elevation wheel counterclockwise. The barrel drops 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 12 degrees. At 15 degrees below horizontal, the mechanism stops. The wheel will not turn further. The B-25 crossing Asashio's beam at 50 feet altitude and 400 yards distance requires a depression angle of approximately 7 degrees, well within the mount's capability. But the aircraft is not stationary. It moves at 250 miles per hour. By the time the gunner acquires the target, calculates lead, and begins tracking, the bomber has shifted position. The required depression angle changes continuously. And somewhere in that shifting geometry, the aircraft drops below the gun's minimum arc. The chief petty officer dies with his hand on the gunner's shoulder. The mathematics are merciless. A target at 50 feet altitude and 1,000 yards range requires a depression angle of roughly 3 degrees, easily achievable. At 500 yards, the angle increases to about 6 degrees. At 250 yards, approximately 11 degrees. At 100 yards, the angle approaches 27 degrees. The Type 96 mount bottoms out at 15 degrees. Every B-25 that survived the approach to 200 yards became geometrically invulnerable. The problem worsened with target motion. A gunner tracking an inbound aircraft had to lead the target, aim where it would be when the rounds arrived, not where it appeared at the moment of firing. Lead calculation for a diving bomber was difficult but trainable. The aircraft followed a predictable vector. Its altitude changed, but the angle of approach remained constant. Spotters could call corrections. Gunners could adjust. A skip bomber at wave height followed no predictable vector. It jinked. It weaved between ships. It used the convoy's own superstructures as cover. The lead calculation changed with every maneuver, and each change altered the required depression angle. A gunner who successfully tracked a target at 6 degrees depression might find, half a second later, that the aircraft had shifted to a position requiring 18 degrees. His mount could not follow. The target escaped his arc of fire before he could adjust. According to the after-action report compiled by 4th Fleet staff, gunners reported targets disappearing below the gun line during tracking. The phrase appears repeatedly in survivor accounts. The aircraft did not disappear in the physical sense. They simply dropped below the mechanical limit of the weapon system. The gunners watched American bombers fly through gaps in their defensive fire that existed by design. Gaps no one had anticipated because no one had imagined an attack profile that would exploit them. The escort commanders understood the geometry problem within minutes of the first attack wave. They attempted tactical solutions. Destroyers increased speed to open range from the bombers, hoping to keep targets above the depression limit. Transports turned away from attackers, presenting stern aspects that reduced the rate of angle change. Gunners aimed at the water ahead of incoming aircraft, hoping to throw up spray that might blind pilots or damage engines. Nothing worked well enough to matter. The spray technique occasionally forced a bomber to abort its run. Speed increases burned fuel that the destroyers could not spare. Evasive turns disrupted convoy formation and created new blind spots. Every tactical adaptation generated second-order problems. The fundamental issue remained unchanged. The weapons were designed for a threat that came from above, and the Americans had found a threat axis that came from below. The Type 96 represented excellent engineering for its intended purpose. Against dive bombers and torpedo planes, the mount performed well. Its rate of fire and traverse speed, its optical sights, all optimized for targets descending through the 15 to 90-degree arc above the horizon. Imperial Navy designers had studied the problem of air attack and produced a logical solution. They solved the wrong problem. Pappy Gunn, working in a sheet metal hangar 1,200 miles away, had looked at the same tactical environment and asked a different question. Not how to attack ships from above, but how to attack ships from a direction their guns could not cover. The answer required no breakthrough in physics, no secret technology, just a willingness to fly low enough to kill yourself if you flinched. The Japanese gunners on March 3rd did not lack courage or training. They lacked weapons that could point at their killers. The water tastes like diesel fuel and blood. Sergeant Tanaka Hiroshi. His name survives only in a Red Cross list compiled months later. Treads water in the Bismarck Sea at 3:14 p.m. on March 3, 1943. Oil coats his face. His transport, Kembu Maru, rolled over 11 minutes ago. Around him float bodies, debris, life rings that nobody reaches in time. The sounds are wrong. No engines, no gunfire, just men screaming and the slap of waves against wreckage. Somewhere to the north, black smoke pillars mark where other ships used to be. A P-38 appears from the east, flying low. Tanaka watches it bank toward a cluster of survivors 200 yards away. The aircraft's nose flashes. Water erupts in a line that walks through the floating men. Some dive, others cannot. The P-38 climbs, turns, makes another pass. Tanaka understands what is happening, but cannot process it. They are shooting men in the water. By nightfall on March 3rd, the convoy had ceased to exist as an organized force. Oigawa Maru, sunk at 11:07 a.m. Teiyo Maru, sunk at 11:22. Kyokusei Maru, sunk at 12:41 p.m. Nojima Maru, burned to the waterline by 2 p.m. Survivors abandoning into oil-covered seas. Kembu Maru, capsized at 3:03. Taimei Maru, beached on the New Guinea coast, burning. Sinai Maru, drifting without power, abandoned. Ayo Maru, sunk by skip bomb at 4:17 p.m., the last transport to go down. 8 transports, 47 hours from confident departure to total annihilation. The destroyers fared little better. Shirayuki took a bomb in her forward magazine and disappeared in a fireball visible from 20 miles. Tokitsukaze burned for 6 hours before sinking. Arashio went down at dusk on March 3rd, with most of her crew still aboard. Asashio, the ship whose gunners had watched targets disappear below their gun line, lasted until March 4th, when American bombers found her limping toward Rabaul at 8 knots. We pulled men from the water until our decks could hold no more. A surviving destroyer captain later reported to Combined Fleet Headquarters. Then, the aircraft returned, and we had to leave men behind. The screaming followed us. The numbers accumulated with bureaucratic precision in the days that followed. 5th Air Force claimed 87 direct hits on vessels, probably an overcount, but not by much. Japanese records, reconstructed after the war, documented approximately 3,000 troops drowned or killed in the attacks. Another 1,000 died in the water during the strafing runs that continued through March 4th. Perhaps 3,000 reached shore in scattered groups, many wounded, all without heavy equipment or supplies. The 51st Division had embarked 6,900 men at Rabaul. Fewer than half reached New Guinea alive. Of those, most would die in the jungle over the following months, starving, sick, unable to be reinforced or evacuated. Artillery pieces, vehicles, 3 months of supplies for Leh garrison. Everything went to the bottom. General Hitoshi Imamura, commanding 8th Area Army at Rabaul, received the casualty reports on March 5th. The loss of the convoy represented more than ships and men. It represented the end of surface reinforcement to New Guinea. The sea lanes that Japanese planners had considered secure, protected by distance, by air cover, by the proven inability of American bombers to hit moving ships, had become killing grounds. Imamura cabled Tokyo that future reinforcement would require submarine transport only. Submarines could carry perhaps 200 troops per voyage. The arithmetic was impossible. In Brisbane, George Kenney read 5th Air Force after-action reports with something approaching disbelief. His modified B-25s had achieved hit rates above 60% against defended targets. The 1% problem had become a 1% survival rate for Japanese convoys entering the Bismarck Sea. Pappy Gunn's improvised commerce destroyers had performed exactly as promised. The Imperial Navy never attempted another major convoy to New Guinea. Sergeant Tanaka Hiroshi survived. The Red Cross list shows him repatriated in 1946, one of the few from Kembu Maru to make it home. The records do not say how he reached shore, how he endured 3 years in the jungle, what he remembered about the afternoon when aircraft flew low and the water turned red. Some things the files do not contain. Paul Irvin Gunn walks through the depot hangar at Townsville on March 10, 1943, reading a telegram from Brisbane. The paper crinkles in his grease-stained fingers. General Kenney's message is 3 sentences long. 5th Air Force wants 60 more B-25s modified to Commerce destroyer configuration. Gunn folds the telegram, slides it into his shirt pocket, and picks up a wrench. The man Brisbane had dismissed 7 months earlier now ran the most productive aircraft modification program in the Pacific Theater. His field improvisation, the nose gun modifications, and the skip bombing technique had become official doctrine overnight. North American Aviation received specifications based on Gunn's Townsville prototypes. Factory production of the B-25H and B-25J strafer variants began within months. By 1944, the aircraft rolling off assembly lines in Kansas City incorporated 8 forward-firing .50 calibers as standard equipment. A 50-year-old depot officer with a hacksaw had redesigned an American medium bomber. The wreck that Yamamoto Kenji examined in 1946, the steel plate with its impossible hole below the waterline, was not an anomaly. It was a verdict. Japanese naval planners had optimized their defenses against threats from above. An American mechanic, working 1,200 miles from the nearest enemy ship, had found the gap in their logic. The hole in that hull represented thousands of identical holes punched through Japanese shipping between 1943 and 1945. Skip bombing spread from the Bismarck Sea to the Philippines, to the South China Sea, to the waters around Formosa. Wherever Japanese convoys sailed within range of American airfields, Gunn's commerce destroyers followed. The Imperial Navy's response confirmed the technique's effectiveness. After March 1943, no major surface convoy attempted the New Guinea run. Submarines delivered what supplies they could, a trickle where an army needed a river. The garrisons at Leh, Salamaua, and Wewak starved in place. Troops ate grass and tree bark. Malaria killed more men than American bullets. The supply line that Operation 81 was meant to reinforce simply ceased to exist. Combined Fleet Headquarters in Tokyo analyzed the Bismarck Sea disaster for 6 weeks. The final assessment, completed in April 1943, acknowledged that existing anti-aircraft weapons could not engage targets below 50 feet altitude during high-speed approach runs. Recommendations included developing new mount designs with greater depression angles and training gunners in low-angle tracking. Implementation would require 18 to 24 months. The American advance did not wait. Gunn received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1943. He continued flying combat missions until the war's end, logging more hours over enemy territory than most pilots half his age. The crews called him Pappy because he looked like someone's grandfather. Thin hair, weathered face, reading glasses perched on his nose while he studied engine diagrams. He had been flying since 1923. He understood aircraft the way a surgeon understands anatomy. After the war, Gunn returned to the Philippines and started an air charter service. He died in a plane crash near Manila in 1957, age 64. The aircraft was a civilian transport, not a bomber. The cause was engine failure over mountainous terrain. His body was recovered from the wreckage 3 days later. The smell of aviation fuel hung in the jungle for a week. The B-25s that flew at Bismarck Sea scattered across the decades. Combat losses claimed some. Corrosion claimed others. A few survived into the jet age as fire bombers and cargo haulers, their gun mounts removed, their war paint stripped, their histories forgotten by owners who bought them for the airframes. One of Gunn's original commerce destroyers, Bureau number 41-12434, sits today in the collection of the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson, Ohio. The aircraft wears olive drab paint and white stars. 8 .50 caliber barrels protrude from the solid nose section where a bombardier's station used to be. The museum placard identifies it as a B-25D modified at Townsville Depot, March 1943. Visitors walk past it on the way to the jet fighters. The aircraft sits motionless, props frozen mid-rotation, guns aimed at climate-controlled air. The placard does not mention the smell of salt spray on plexiglass at 50 feet, or the sound of 8 guns firing simultaneously, or the way a 500-pound bomb skips across gray water, or what it looks like when that bomb punches through a hull that cannot shoot back.